Here is a three-part story based on the title you provided. It is written in a third-person style, using simple and engaging English to bring the narrative to life. The afternoon sun was brutal, beating down on the tarmac of the Naval Air Station. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and stuck the uniforms of the young security guards to their skin. They were part of a special detachment, pulled from their regular duties to provide high-profile security for a significant, undisclosed event. Their orders were simple and strict. Verify every single individual who attempted to enter the secure area. No exceptions, no shortcuts. They took their job seriously, their young faces set in expressions of hard-won authority. A dusty, nondescript sedan pulled up to the first checkpoint, far from the main gate where official vehicles with flags and senior officers were arriving. From the car, a woman stepped out. She was of medium height, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of years of physical discipline. Her hair was cut short and neat, and she wore a simple, lightweight civilian jacket over a plain shirt and comfortable trousers. She carried no briefcase, no visible identification on a lanyard, and no accompanying aid. To the guards, she looked like a contractor, maybe a base worker, or perhaps someone's relative who had taken a wrong turn. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," the first guard, a young man with a serious expression, stated, holding up his hand. "You can't bring a personal vehicle past this point." The woman nodded calmly. "I understand. I'm here for the briefing. I'll need to get to Hangar 4. The guard glanced at a clipboard. He had a list of names and titles, mostly commanders and captains, attending a high-level strategy meeting. The name on his list didn't match the face of the woman before him, and certainly not her casual attire. "Ma'am, this is a closed event. Unless you're on the manifest or have a military ID and a confirmed badge, I can't let you through." "Of course," she said, her voice quiet but carrying a strange, unmistakable weight. "I should be on your list. Please check again. Admiral." The word hung in the air. Admiral. The guard's partner, a young woman, let out a short, disbelieving snort before catching herself. The first guard's eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down. He had spent the morning watching 4-star admirals arrive with their entourages, their chests heavy with ribbons and stars. This woman, she didn't fit the picture. She looked more like she was heading to a weekend hike. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his tone hardening just a fraction. He was following protocol, and his gut told him something was off. The woman reached into her jacket and produced a standard military ID card. The guard took it, his eyes scanning the details. The name was unfamiliar to him, but the rank made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a captain or a commander. It was a flag rank, 3 stars, Vice Admiral. He stared at the card, then back at her face. A flicker of doubt crossed his features. This had to be a mistake, a misprint maybe? He'd heard of administrative errors before. He looked at her again. No uniform, no stars on her collar, no crisp salute from passing officers. She stood there patiently, waiting, her gaze steady and unnervingly calm. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, please," he said, his voice now a formal command. He was falling back on procedure. Something didn't add up and his training kicked in. "We need to do a more thorough check." His partner moved to the other side of the car, her hand resting lightly on her sidearm, a standard precaution. The first guard spoke into his radio, his voice low and urgent. "Control, this is Checkpoint Alpha. I have a situation. A female civilian claims to be a flag officer, requesting immediate confirmation and backup." The radio crackled. "Copy, Alpha. Sending a supervisor." The woman offered no resistance. She stood by her car as they asked her to, her hands visible. She watched the young guards with something that looked almost like pride. They were doing their job. They were being thorough. It was exactly the kind of vigilance she had built her entire career on, instilling in the young men and women under her command. The irony was not lost on her. A few minutes later, a white vehicle with official markings sped towards the checkpoint. A senior master-at-arms, a grizzled chief with over 20 years of service, stepped out. He walked towards the group, his eyes immediately falling on the woman. He stopped dead in his tracks. His face, weathered by decades of sea duty and discipline, went pale. He snapped to attention so fast his heels clicked on the asphalt. His arm shot up in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Admiral!" he barked, his voice ringing with shock and profound respect. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am." The two young guards froze. Their eyes widened. The blood drained from their faces, then rushed back in a hot wave of embarrassment. The woman, Admiral, returned the chief's salute with practiced ease, her movement fluid and precise. "At ease, Chief," she said softly. She then turned her calm gaze to the two young guards. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice clear and firm. "You followed your training and your protocol. Never apologize for doing your job correctly. Ever." The tension shattered. The chief let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The young guards stood rigid, their mouths slightly open. The female guard who had snorted earlier looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The Admiral simply smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Now, if it's all clear, I have a meeting I'm already late for." As the Admiral's sedan was waved through, the two young guards remained frozen, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. The chief watched the car disappear towards Hangar 4 before turning to them. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The look on his face was enough. "You two," he began, his voice low and serious, "just put your hands on a 3-star admiral, one of the most highly decorated and operationally experienced officers in the United States Navy. Do you have any idea who that was?" He didn't wait for an answer. He knew they didn't. That was Vice Admiral Alara Vance. Before she pinned on that 3rd star, before she ran strategy for the Joint Chiefs, she spent the first 20 years of her career in the shadows. She was one of the Navy's first female operators. Not just support, operator. She ran missions with DevGru before they even had a formal name for women in those roles. She's been on the ground in every major conflict since Desert Storm. She helped rewrite the doctrine for counter-piracy after the Maersk, Alabama. The SEALs don't just respect her, the stories they tell about her are the stuff of legend. The chief's words painted a picture far removed from the unassuming woman in civilian clothes they had just detained. The young man's stomach churned. He had spoken to her with suspicion, with a hint of condescension. He had treated her like a trespasser. The shame was a physical weight on his shoulders. "Chief, I didn't know. She wasn't in uniform, she just looked like..." The chief cut him off. "You looked like what? Like a civilian? Like a woman who didn't belong? Let me tell you something about Admiral Vance. That just looking like she does is a weapon. It's a tool. She spent her entire career being underestimated. It's what kept her alive in places you can't imagine. And it's probably what allowed her to walk up to a checkpoint today without a single flag officer being recognized. But you," he pointed a thick finger at the guard, "your job is to see past the uniform, or the lack of one. Your job is to know that protocol isn't just for people who look the part." Meanwhile, inside Hangar 4, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room was filled with senior officers from every branch, all waiting. The reason for the high security was now apparent. They were awaiting a secure video link from the Pentagon to discuss a burgeoning international crisis in the South China Sea. A high-ranking Navy official, a 2-star admiral, was pacing at the front. He looked at his watch, annoyed. "Where is she?" he muttered to an aide. "We have a timeline here. The secretary is waiting." Just then, the side door opened and Admiral Vance walked in. There was no fanfare, no announcement. She simply walked to the front of the room, nodded to the 2-star, and took her place at the center of the main table. The 2-star's annoyance evaporated, replaced by a look of pure deference. He immediately stepped back. On the large screen, the face of the Secretary of Defense appeared. He looked grim. "Admiral Vance, good of you to join us. Let's get started." The room fell silent. For the next hour, Admiral Vance led the discussion. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out the situation with crystal clarity, referencing specific ship movements, intelligence reports, and the capabilities of the SEAL teams under her operational control. She spoke of tides, wind patterns, and rules of engagement with the same ease she discussed diplomatic fallout and strategic objectives. The young guards at the checkpoint were a universe away. In this room, there was no doubt. This woman was not just in charge, she was the cornerstone upon which the entire operation rested. She was the quiet, unshakable authority in the storm. Hours later, the meeting concluded. The plan was set. The crisis, for now, was averted. As the senior officers filed out, many stopped to shake Admiral Vance's hand, their faces showing a mixture of respect and relief. Finally, she was alone in the hangar, gathering her notes. The chief from the checkpoint appeared in the doorway, hovering uncertainly. She looked up and saw him. "Chief, come in." He walked over, standing at attention. "Admiral, on behalf of myself and my team, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for the incident at the gate. It was a failure of awareness and judgment, and I take full responsibility. Those guards are young, but that's no excuse. I'll be entering a formal letter of reprimand in their files." Admiral Vance finished placing her papers in a worn leather briefcase. She looked at the chief, her expression unreadable. Then she did something unexpected. She gestured to the chair next to her. "Sit down, Chief." He hesitated, then sat, perching awkwardly on the edge of the seat. "Chief, do you know why I wasn't in uniform today?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Because I was visiting my daughter," she said, her voice softening for the first time. "She's a sophomore in college. She doesn't like it when I show up with a bunch of official cars and people saluting. She just wants her mom. So, I went as her mom. I was on my way from there straight here. I didn't have time to change, and honestly, I didn't think it would matter. I thought my ID would be enough." She leaned back. "Now, about your guards. The young man, the one who stopped me first. What's his name?" "Seaman Roberts, ma'am." "Roberts. He looked me in the eye. He didn't like what he saw, but he didn't back down. He had a duty and he did it. And the young woman, she was ready to support him. That's called cover. That's called teamwork. Do you know how many times my life has depended on young men and women with that exact same attitude?" The chief was silent, listening. "You said their failure was a lack of awareness. I disagree. Their failure was a lack of imagination. They couldn't imagine that a woman in civilian clothes could be a 3-star admiral because no one has ever shown them one. The Navy has a long history of that, Chief. People who couldn't imagine women leading ships, commanding troops, or running spec ops. The women who did it anyway had to be tough enough to handle the missions and patient enough to handle the doubters. Roberts and his partner are not the problem. The system that taught them what an admiral looks like is the problem." She stood up and the chief immediately rose with her. "You will not reprimand those guards," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Instead, you will bring them to my office tomorrow at 800. I will personally thank them for their vigilance. And then, I will tell them my story. I will tell them about the missions I've run, the men and women I've served with, and the long road it took to get those 3 stars. Maybe then, the next time they're at a checkpoint, they'll have the imagination to see that a hero, a leader, an admiral can come in any form." She picked up her briefcase and looked at the chief one last time. "That's an order, Chief. A good leader doesn't just correct mistakes, they use them to build a stronger, smarter team. Dismissed." She walked out of the hangar into the cool evening air, leaving the chief standing alone, a new and profound respect for the quiet woman in civilian clothes burning in his chest. He knew with absolute certainty that he had just received the most important leadership lesson of his entire career. The guards at the gate thought they were detaining an intruder. In reality, they had been given a master class by a true American warrior. And the story of that day, of the admiral who looked like a civilian, would be told on that base for generations to come.